So why don't you introduce yourself for people who might not be aware of who you are exactly?
Okay, I'm Stanley Nelson. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm the producer, director of the new film Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool.
And that's coming out, well, I guess it already is sort of being screened.
Yeah, it premiered here in Chicago on Friday.
So can you tell me a little bit about Birth of the Cool?
Yeah, Birth of the Cool is the first biography of Miles Davis, documentary biography made in the United States, and it's done with the complete cooperation of Miles' and family and Sony Music. So we had great access to Miles' life and to a bunch of material. We use a bunch of home movies that have never been seen before of Miles. We interview a lot of the musicians who played with him: Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Ron Carter from the Second Quintet, Jimmy Cobb, who's the only surviving member of the Kind of Blue Quintet, and many others: Carlos Santana, Marcus Miller, some of the other people we interviewed in the film.
And so, what were I in the email I saw that you and Vince Wilburn, who is Miles' nephew, are in town for the premiere screenings at the Siskel Film Center.
Right.
Is he? Because Miles had a sister and a brother. Is he? How exactly is he related in terms of?
Vince Wilburn is Miles Davis' sister's son. And he also played with Miles. He plays drums, and he played with Miles, and he has a band, the Miles Davis Electric Band. He also is one of the people who controls the Miles Davis estate, and therefore the Miles Davis legacy.
So Miles Davis is definitely one of the more major and interesting figures in jazz music and bebop and fusion and beyond. Could you comment at all on where was like a brief bio perhaps is on him in terms of like sort of how were you able to sort of discover how he was able to really get into music? I mean, I'm sort of aware that he came from, I think, a fairly middle class and musical family. Is that correct?
Yeah, Miles Davis was born in 1926 in a small town called Alton, Illinois, and was then raised in East St. Louis. Miles' father was a dentist, and by definitely the standards of the African American community at that point, Miles was very wealthy. Growing up, Miles, they had a house in East St. Louis. They had a farm outside of East St. Louis where Miles, rode horses, had his own horse, and those kind of things. Miles took to the trumpet early on, and in 1944 he was 17, and he goes to as soon as he graduates high school, he goes to New York, and very quickly joins Charlie Parker's band, the kind of the most instrumental band in the development of bebop. And by the time Miles is 19, he's on his way.
Wow. Yeah, that's sort of interesting that Miles, like you said, especially by the standards of the African American community, he, like you hear stories about Louis Armstrong playing for like change to get dinner for on the streets of New Orleans. But it's sort of interesting that Miles comes, I feel, from this different world, and yet still like the sort of different experience did not really impact his musical ability or creativity, I guess, or ability to sort of be in tune with the music and the experience.
Right. I mean, I think as you see over and over again in the film, Miles Davis lived the life of a black man, in that part of the 20th century. As someone says, Miles's wealth and privilege, didn't make him immune from, what any other black person would experience in that part of the 20th century. I think it actually affected Miles in that, in some respects, Miles, always felt that he was due a certain amount of respect. Miles was not surprised by wealth. Miles was not surprised by the trappings of wealth. And so I think what did affect Miles was the fact that the trappings of wealth didn't matter in the United States. And if you were a black man, if you were rich and famous, so many times in Miles' life it's thrown up in his face that he's still a black man.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So I guess continuing with Miles Davis is sort of often one of the more polarizing figures in just terms of the full totality of his career, is one of the more polarizing figures in the sort of jazz community. Were you able to sort of identify what was the thing that drove him to sort of drastically keep evolving and changing his sound and sort of the style of the music in general? Because he was a true trailblazer on many fronts, with Charlie Parker and bebop at first, and then sort of the more, I guess, I don't even know how to describe it other than the sound of the second great quintet in the mid-'60s, and then pushing that on to fusion in the late 60s and early 70s, and sort of the Electric Miles.
I think we look at kind of all the facets of Miles' music. I mean, one of the first lines in the film from Miles is that that if you want to keep creating, you have to be about change, and that's like the second line in the film, and I think that's kind of the Miles' mantra. That creativity is about change, and Miles was nothing else if he wasn't creative. And he kept evolving and kept changing, and to him, that's what art was, and that's what music was, and so it was very important for him to continue to do that. One thing that Miles could have done, he could have played kind of blue for the rest of his life, and been a very rich man. He could have had a tour for the rest of his life that was Miles Davis plays kind of blue, plays kind of blue song, song by song, right off the record, and people were flocked to see it, but that wasn't who Miles was. That wasn't what he wanted to do. And thank God for that.
Yeah. So another sort of very polarizing aspect of Miles is especially with featured in his autobiography, are all of the sort of feuds he had. Was there anything sort of interesting about those sort of personal conflicts that he had with other musicians that came up in the making of the documentary?
We don't get into kind of his personal feuds, with Wynton or people like that, if that's what you're thinking about. But it's very clear from the documentary that Miles could be very aggressive, could be hard to get along with. Was very outspoken. We talk in depth about some of the relationships that he had, and his abusive relationships that he had with women. It's a look at Miles warts and all, and I think that's what makes the film work so well, is that it is it's not sugar-coated. We're looking at Miles warts and all.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's especially with sort of, I mean, I guess that could be said about many musicians, many of the greatest musicians of all time, is that no one, there's sort of, just like with, I guess, everybody, there's not really everybody sort of has these things that that they can work on, I suppose. But I guess I could use this opportunity to switch this back to get a little more about you as well, Mr. Nelson. How exactly did you sort of, I mean, have you been a jazz fan your whole life? How did you decide that you wanted to make this documentary about one of the most prolific and legendary and greatest jazz musicians of all time?
Well, I've made a number of historical documentaries, and I am a great jazz fan, and really wanted to do a music film. I use a lot of music in the other films that I've made, but I had very little opportunity to make kind of a pure music film. And so, in thinking about that, came upon the idea of doing Miles, and who's better to do? Miles is not only, is one of the iconic figures in jazz, but he's such an interesting and incredible character in so many other ways. He became an icon just because of the way he looked, because of his clothes, because of his cars, because of his women, because of his whole lifestyle, because of his attitude. And so there's all that rolled into it. So it makes Miles such an interesting and complicated character, which I think makes for an interesting and complicated film.
What do you think was your biggest goal in making this film? What did you want to sort of show the most or reveal the most about?
I think, it's a 2-hour film, so there's a lot of things that we wanted to reveal and talk about, So there's Miles' music. We wanted to make sure that within the film you heard Miles' music, because so many times in music documentaries, you don't really hear the music. So we really wanted to talk about that. We wanted to talk about race in America, and that became part of what the film is really about. It's about race in America. We wanted to talk about, the different ways that Miles changed music. We wanted to talk about, how sometimes, being a genius, affects the human being. So, Miles was truly a genius, but a lot of times he wasn't a nice guy. And so, I think sometimes it's hard to live in your own skin when you're a genius. So, there's so many different things that people can take away from this movie. I'm happy, whatever they take away, I'm happy if people just, say, hey, that was entertaining, and leave it at that. But, if they get more out of it, that's great.
Do you think that, like, sort of the lessons learned from examining Miles and, like you say, the life of sort of the sort of troubles and triumphs of being sort of like a black musical genius in America, do you think that those can still be applied today?
Yeah, I don't think that much has changed. Things have changed on the surface, but no, I don't. I think that what Miles went through, anybody else can go through. I think the only difference may be that some people now, if you're at the top of your craft, and top of your earning power, like Beyonce or somebody like that, you don't have to deal with the public at all, ever, and because you're in the stratosphere of making $1 billion. Miles wasn't there. But then again, you think of Prince, who died of a drug overdose. Why did that happen?
True, very true. So, I guess we could sort of wrap this up a little bit. Is there anything else you'd like to say about Miles or the film?
Yeah, people should come see the film. The film will be at the Cisco Center for the next 2 weeks. It's an amazingly entertaining film. We sold out every day this weekend. We had 3 sold-out showings this weekend. But it'll be there for another 2 weeks. We've sold out everywhere we've gone: L.A., New York, been held over, all over the country. It's a really entertaining and funny film. I mean, there's a whole lot of great music and just some great people talking about some great stories. And as I said, it became more than a story about Miles. It became a story about America and about a genius and about struggling to reinvent yourself constantly and what the toll that takes on a human being. So I mean, I've been making films for 4 years. I'm really, really proud of this film. It's just been an incredible honor for me to make this film about Miles. And we've had a lot of musicians come and see the film and come over and over again to see the film because I think it's a really poignant film.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you can never examine someone like Miles Davis in a vacuum without sort of understanding the context of the world they lived in and the tensions and relations of that world. So yeah, that all sounds really great. Like again, film is at the Siskel Center for the next 2 weeks. And I guess just as one last question, do you have a favorite Miles record? Not really. I mean, one of the things that happened in making this film was, I re-examined so much of Miles' music. So, it's easy to say Kind of Blue, which I love, but I love some albums, some of the ESPN and some of the other, ESP, Yeah.
some of the other, albums from the Second Quintet. I love Elevated to the Gallows, which we do a big thing on in the film.
Yeah.
The film, the music score that Miles created in France. I love, Birth of the Cool, Bitches Brew, On the Corner, all of those are part of the film. So, and we talk about Tutu, and Marcus Miller is in the film who produced Tutu and wrote the song Tutu and talks about how he wrote it for Miles and recording with Miles. And we found footage of them actually recording in the recording studio of Tutu. So, a lot of great stuff in the film, and the film made me kind of go back and listen to a lot of Miles that I might have skipped over or forgotten about, and fell in love with again while I was making the film.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Truly such a major figure in jazz music. So you could really spend weeks just getting into and really actively listening to all his music, more than weeks probably. But yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Nelson. It was
thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to have you, and I look forward to seeing the movie, the film.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll like it, and just let people know. Tell people. I mean, that's how we've been spreading the word about the film, and how we've been held over everywhere we go. It's a real kind of crowd pleaser. There's a lot of great music and a lot of great stuff, and as I say, it's almost a comedy because it's really funny. There's some great funny stuff in there. So, thank you so much. I appreciate it.